Sarah never imagined that following her husband would lead to the most shocking discovery of her life. What started as suspicious late-night phone calls and mysterious absences was about to unravel into something far more complex than a simple affair. It was a cold Tuesday evening when Marcus kissed her forehead and whispered the same lie he'd been telling for months. "Emergency at the office," he said. "Important client meeting that couldn't wait." Sarah watched from their bedroom window as his car disappeared into the darkness, the red taillights fading like dying embers. For 3 months, these mysterious departures had been eating away at her sanity. The Marcus she married 5 years ago never worked past 6 o'clock. He was home for dinner, helped with dishes, and spent evenings watching Netflix with her curled against his chest. But something had changed. Phone calls taken in hushed whispers behind closed doors. Text messages hidden from view. And these late-night emergencies that always seemed to happen when she was already in her pajamas. Tonight would be different. Tonight, Sarah would finally get her answers. She grabbed her keys and followed at a safe distance, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus drove through the familiar streets of their suburban neighborhood, past the grocery store where they bought their weekly supplies, past the park where they'd had their first date. But instead of heading toward downtown where his office stood, he turned onto Maple Street. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Maple Street was where Rebecca lived. Rebecca, his college girlfriend. Rebecca, who had moved back to town just 4 months ago. The pieces seemed to fall into place with devastating clarity. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. But as Marcus's car slowed to a stop, Sarah realized they weren't at Rebecca's house. They were in front of a modest brick building she'd never seen before. A small sign near the entrance read Riverside Community Center. Confusion replaced her certainty. What could Marcus possibly be doing at a community center at 9:30 at night? Sarah parked across the street and watched as her husband walked toward the building with purposeful steps. He wasn't alone. A woman emerged from the shadows near the entrance. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, she could see the woman was stunning. Tall, elegant, with long dark hair that caught the streetlight like silk. She wore a fitted black dress that hugged her curves, and when she smiled at Marcus, Sarah felt her world begin to crumble. The woman placed her hand on Marcus's arm with familiar intimacy. They spoke in low voices, their heads close together, before disappearing through the community center's side entrance. Sarah sat frozen in her car for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Every worst fear she'd harbored seemed to be materializing before her eyes. Her husband, the man who promised to love and cherish her, was clearly involved with this mysterious woman. But questions nagged at her. Why meet at a community center? Why the secrecy if it was just an affair? Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Sarah crossed the street and approached the building. The front entrance was locked, but she could see light spilling from windows on the second floor. She circled the building until she found the same side entrance Marcus and the woman had used. The door was unlocked. Inside, Sarah found herself in a dimly lit hallway. The sound of voices drifted from somewhere above. She climbed a narrow staircase, each step amplifying the thundering of her pulse. At the top, she discovered a partially open door leading to what appeared to be a classroom. Through the crack, Sarah could see Marcus sitting in a circle with about a dozen other people. The beautiful woman from outside was sitting directly across from him. But this wasn't what Sarah had expected. Everyone was holding hands, their heads bowed as if in prayer or meditation. A man with kind eyes and graying temples was speaking softly. "Remember, healing begins when we share our truth with others who understand our journey. Marcus, would you like to continue from where you left off last week?" Sarah watched in stunned silence as her husband lifted his head, and she saw something that made her heart break in an entirely different way. Tears were streaming down his face. "It's been 5 years since the accident," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. 5 years since I killed that little girl. And I still wake up every night seeing her face." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What accident? What little girl? In 5 years of marriage, Marcus had never mentioned anything like this. The beautiful woman across from him spoke with a gentle voice. "The guilt doesn't define you, Marcus. What defines you is how you choose to heal and how you honor Emma's memory." Emma. The name sent chills down Sarah's spine. I keep thinking about her parents, Marcus continued. How they've forgiven me when I can't forgive myself. How they started this support group to help people like us, people who have to live with the weight of having taken a life, even accidentally. Understanding crashed over Sarah like a tidal wave. This wasn't an affair. These weren't secret romantic meetings. Her husband had been attending grief counseling sessions for something that happened before they even met. The beautiful woman spoke again, and Sarah realized she looked familiar. Where had she seen that face before? And then it clicked. The newspaper article from years ago. The story about a local family who had turned tragedy into purpose after losing their 7-year-old daughter to a drunk driver. This woman was Emma's mother. The healing happens in stages, Marcus, she was saying. First, we learn to forgive ourselves. Then we learn to live again. And finally, we learn to use our pain to help others avoid the same mistakes. Sarah felt her knees grow weak. All these months, she'd been suspecting her husband of betrayal when he was actually torturing himself with guilt over something that happened before she knew him. The late-night phone calls weren't to a mistress, they were to his sponsor in the program. The mysterious absences weren't affairs, they were therapy sessions. As she listened, more pieces of Marcus's behavior began to make sense. His reluctance to drive after even one drink. The way he always insisted on taking cabs or rideshares when they went out. His generous donations to children's charities that he never wanted to discuss. The nightmare she sometimes heard him having, mumbling apologies in his sleep. I want to tell my wife, Marcus said suddenly. I've wanted to for years, but I'm terrified she'll look at me differently. That she'll leave me when she finds out what kind of person she married. Emma's mother reached across the circle and squeezed his hand. The people who truly love us can handle our worst truths, Marcus. In fact, they often love us more for trusting them with those truths. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Her husband, the man she'd suspected of cheating, was actually protecting her from his pain because he was afraid of losing her love. All this time, she'd been building walls around her heart while he was building walls around his guilt. She turned to leave, knowing she had heard enough, but her foot caught the edge of a loose floorboard. The small creak echoed in the quiet hallway like a gunshot. The voices in the room stopped. Footsteps approached the door. Sarah's heart pounded as the door swung open fully, and Marcus stood there, his face pale with shock and fear. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of all his secrets, all her suspicions, and all their misunderstandings hung between them like a chasm. Sarah, he whispered, his voice breaking. I can explain. She looked into his eyes and saw the man she'd fallen in love with, but now she also saw his pain, his guilt, and his fear of losing her. In that moment, Sarah realized that their marriage hadn't been falling apart because of what he was hiding from her. It had been falling apart because they had both been hiding from each other. I know, she said softly, stepping forward and taking his trembling hands in hers. I know, and I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. As Marcus collapsed into her arms, Sarah understood that sometimes the most devastating discoveries aren't about betrayal. Sometimes they're about the love that was always there, buried beneath fear and misunderstanding, waiting to be brave enough to emerge into the light.